The mining station Argus 12 floated in the black emptiness, like a lonely island in an endless sea. Its metal walls hummed with the sound of engines, air pumps, and conveyor belts carrying freshly mined minerals. Most people here worked in shifts, so long that the stars outside the windows almost felt like decorations instead of real suns. Ethan Cole, a young human engineer, was used to the station's routine. He was good with machines, bad with schedules, and terrible at keeping quiet, when he probably should. His crewmates liked him for his quick repairs and smart thinking. The security team? Not so much. They thought he joked too much, especially when things were serious. On this particular day, the station was holding a very unusual guest. She had arrived in a heavily damaged enemy fighter, taken prisoner after a short but fierce battle. Her name, at least the one humans could pronounce, was Zira. She was Zareth, a species that made most human soldiers nervous just by existing. The Zareth were fast, agile, and had sharp curved claws that could cut through light armor. Their senses were sharper than human eyes and ears. They spoke in a voice that could sound like a low growl or a smooth melody, depending on their mood. Rumors said Zira was the most dangerous of them all, a trained hunter, responsible for ending dozens of human missions. Ethan wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her. The security team made that clear. But one of the holding cell's force field generators was glitching, and Ethan was the only one on duty who could fix it quickly. So there he was, toolbox in hand, walking down the secure corridor towards Cell 7. Two guards stood at the door. Both looked uneasy. "Be quick, Cole," one of them said. "And don't talk to her." Ethan grinned. "Talk to her? I'm just here for the machine." The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dimly lit cell. Zira sat cross-legged on the floor, her dark silver hair falling over her shoulders. Her bright golden eyes locked on him the moment he stepped inside. She didn't move, didn't blink. She just watched. Ethan crouched by the generator in the corner, trying not to think too much about the alien warrior staring at him like a cat watching a small animal. He unscrewed a panel and began adjusting the field's power relay. "You're smaller than I imagined," he said without thinking. The words left his mouth before his brain had time to stop them. Zira tilted her head slightly. "Smaller?" Her voice was low, smooth, but there was a dangerous edge beneath it. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, half smiling. "Yeah, the way the soldiers talk, I was expecting claws the size of mining drills. Guess they exaggerated." The room went silent. Zira's eyes narrowed, and the faintest movement of her fingers revealed the curve of her claws. They weren't the size of drills, but they looked plenty sharp. Most people would have apologized. Ethan simply turned back to the generator and tightened another bolt. Zira didn't speak again, but her gaze followed his every movement until he finished. When he stood up and slung the toolbox over his shoulder, she finally said, "You speak boldly for a fragile creature." "Guess I've never been good at keeping my mouth shut," Ethan replied. "Anyway, field's fixed. Try not to break it again." He stepped out before she could answer, nodding at the guards as the door closed behind him. That night, Ethan sat in the station's mess hall, replaying the moment in his head. The look in her eyes had been strange. Not just angry. Something else. Curiosity, maybe. He wasn't sure. Whatever it was, he doubted he'd ever see her again once the military ship arrived to transfer her. He was wrong. 3 days later, the station alarms blared. A pirate ship had dropped out of warp, firing on the station's outer hull. Chaos filled the corridors, sirens, shouting, the rumble of impacts. Ethan was halfway to the engineering deck when he heard it. A security override opening Cell 7, turned a corner and nearly ran straight into Zira. She was out of her restraints, moving with a predator's grace. For a second, Ethan thought she would attack. Instead, she stepped forward, cutting off his escape. The corridor lights flickered, throwing her sharp features into shadow. Still think my claws are small, human? She asked, voice quiet but dangerous. Ethan's heart pounded, but he forced a grin. Compared to my wrench? Yeah. For a moment, there was silence. Then, unexpectedly, Zyra's lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. Not warm, not friendly. But not entirely hostile either. Perhaps you are braver than you look, she said. Before Ethan could respond, an explosion shook the floor. The bulkhead at the far end of the corridor began to close. Zyra moved fast, faster than his eyes could follow, and slipped past him toward the escape routes. She didn't kill him. She didn't even push him aside. She just gave him one last unreadable glance before disappearing into the chaos. When the battle ended and the pirate ship retreated, Zyra was gone. No one knew how she had escaped the station. The guards assumed she'd stolen a shuttle and vanished into deep space. Ethan knew better. That look in her eyes before she left. It didn't feel like goodbye. That night, lying in his bunk, he thought about the sharpness of her gaze, the way she moved, the strange flicker of something almost human in her expression. He had teased the deadliest alien girl alive, and somehow she had spared him. He wasn't sure if that was luck or the beginning of trouble. 3 days had passed since the pirate attack. The Argus 12 mining station was slowly returning to normal, but the damage reports were long and the engineering crew barely slept. Ethan Cole kept busy fixing broken power lines, sealing damaged bulkheads, and replacing melted circuits. Everyone else still talked about Zyra's escape. Slipped out right under our noses, one guard complained in the mess hall. Fastest thing I've ever seen. Fastest and deadliest, another added. If she comes back, we're all in trouble. Ethan kept his head down and didn't mention that he'd spoken to her just before she vanished. He didn't want extra questions. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd looked at him, like she was studying him, not just deciding whether to kill him. The next week, Ethan was assigned to inspect a small cargo shuttle. It was a simple trip. Fly to a supply depot on a nearby moon, swap parts, and return. Easy. He liked trips like this. No alarms, no armed soldiers, no deadly alien warriors. At least that was the plan. Halfway to the depot, a warning light flashed on the shuttle's dashboard. Engine coolant failure. Ethan cursed under his breath. He tried rerouting the coolant. Flow. But the heat gauge climbed into the red zone. A burning smell filled the cabin. He had no choice. He cut the engines and prepared for an emergency landing. The shuttle dropped into the thin atmosphere of a barren, icy moon. The landing was rough, shaking his teeth and making the metal frame groan. When it was over, he sat for a moment, breathing hard. The snow outside was endless and pale, with jagged black rocks jutting up like broken teeth. Great, he muttered. Middle of nowhere. He checked his comms. No signal. The cold outside was lethal without proper shelter, and the shuttle's power reserves wouldn't last long. That's when he saw the movement. Something dark moved against the white snow. A figure approached from the rocky hills, moving with deliberate, balanced steps. Ethan's stomach tightened when he recognized the shape. Long silver hair, golden eyes, Zyra. She stopped a few meters from the shuttle, watching him through the cockpit window. There was no weapon in her hands, but her claws glinted faintly in the pale light. Ethan stepped out cautiously, the cold air biting at his face. Well, he said, forcing a half smile. Didn't expect to see you again. Zyra tilted her head. You are far from your metal nest, human. My shuttle decided it wanted a vacation, he said, pointing at the smoke curling from the engine. Guess we're both stuck out here. Her gaze flicked toward the distant hills. I was hunting my own enemies. My ship was destroyed. I tracked them here, but the cold slows even me. Ethan noticed the way she shifted her weight, as if her side hurt. The edge of her armor was cracked, and there was a faint scorch mark across her ribs. She was wounded. He should have been afraid. Instead, he found himself saying, "There's room in the shuttle. It's warmer inside." For a moment, she didn't move. Then she stepped closer, snow crunching softly beneath her boots. She followed him inside without a word. The shuttle wasn't much, but the heater worked. Zyra sat on one of the cargo benches, her eyes scanning every corner like she was still deciding if it was safe. Ethan dug into his emergency kit and pulled out a heat blanket. "Here," he said, offering it. She looked at it like it was a strange tool, then took it without thanks. Her claws made a faint sound against the material. "You're limping," Ethan said. "Let me see." She raised an eyebrow. "Do you think I will let prey touch me?" "Only if the prey happens to be the guy keeping the heater running," he replied. A long pause. Then, slowly, she shifted the armor aside. The wound wasn't deep, but the skin around it was bruised and burned. Ethan cleaned it carefully, his hands steady even under her sharp gaze. "You are different," she said after a while. "How so?" he asked. "You speak to me as if I am not dangerous." "Oh, I know you're dangerous," he said with a grin. "But you're also freezing, and I don't like watching people freeze." For the first time, she didn't reply right away. Instead, she studied him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Hours passed. The temperature outside dropped lower, and the wind howled against the shuttle's thin hull. The heater struggled, and Ethan realized they'd have to conserve heat. "To survive the night, bad news," he said. "We'll need to stay close together to stay warm. Heat blankets only go so far." Her golden eyes fixed on him. "Humans are fragile. You need this more than I do." "Maybe," he said, "but I don't plan to wake up frozen, and I don't think you do either." After a moment, she gave a short nod. "Very well. But if you try anything foolish, I won't," he said quickly. "Trust me, I like living." They sat close, the shared warmth making the small shuttle feel less like an icebox. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, Zira's breathing was steady. Her eyes half closed. For the first time, she didn't look like she was planning to strike at him. Still, Ethan knew this strange truce wouldn't last forever. She was still the deadliest alien girl alive, and now they were stranded together. "If you want, I can." Now write part 3, Stranded Together, where the survival bond deepens and the first hints. The wind outside howled like some wild creature circling the shuttle. Snowflakes slammed against the thin metal hull, making a faint, steady tapping sound. Inside, the small heater hummed weakly, doing its best to fight the freezing air. Ethan sat on the floor beside Zyra, both wrapped in the emergency heat blanket. Their shoulders touched, and every so often he could feel the slow rise and fall of her breathing. For someone known as the deadliest alien alive, she was surprisingly still. Zira's golden eyes were half closed, but Ethan could tell she wasn't. Asleep. Her head tilted slightly, always listening. Every distant creak from the shuttle's frame made her glance toward the source. "You don't trust Easy, do you?" Ethan said quietly. She didn't look at him. "Trust is for those who survive long enough to regret it?" He gave a short laugh. "That's a bit dark." "It is truth," she replied. Hours passed like that, quiet, tense, and cold. Ethan kept checking the power gauge. The heater would last through the night, but only barely. The real problem was food. He had a few ration bars, but they wouldn't last long if rescue didn't come. "You hungry?" he asked. Zira looked at the small packet in his hand. "Human. Food is strange. Too soft. Well, unless you plan on going outside and catching something in a blizzard, this is all we've got." She took the packet, sniffed it, then bit into it with a frown. "Tastes like dust. Better than starving. Debatable." But she finished it anyway. When night fell, the cold crept in sharper than before. The blanket was good, but not perfect. Ethan's fingers were stiff despite wearing gloves. He shifted closer to Zyra without thinking. She didn't move away. "You're warm," he said. "My species was born in heat," she replied. "Cold is unpleasant." Ethan smirked. "So the deadliest alien in the galaxy doesn't like snow?" Her eyes narrowed. "I do not like being reminded of weakness." "You're not weak. You're just cold-blooded about the cold." That earned him a faint sound, halfway between a scoff and something else. He wasn't sure, but it almost felt like she was amused. Later, when the storm's roar faded to a dull whisper, Ethan checked the comms again. Still nothing. The signal was dead. He sighed. If rescue doesn't come tomorrow, we'll have to find shelter somewhere else. This shuttle isn't built for long stays. Zira's gaze shifted toward the dark mountains in the distance. There may be caves there, warmer than this shell. You think we can make it? I can. You are slower. Thanks for the vote of confidence. She glanced at him, then at his worn jacket. You will need my help. Ethan smiled. Guess I'll just have to trust you. She didn't answer right away. Then very softly she said, Strange human. The night was long, but eventually Ethan drifted into a light sleep. He woke once when Zira shifted, her head brushing lightly against his shoulder. He almost moved away, but something about the weight of her presence kept him still. When he woke again, the storm had stopped. The world outside was covered in fresh snow, glittering faintly under the pale light of the distant sun. They stepped out into the cold together, their breath forming clouds in the air. Zyra moved ahead, her steps leaving sharp, deep prints in the snow. Ethan followed, doing his best to keep pace. The walk to the mountains was hard. The snow was deep, and the air was so cold it bit into Ethan's lungs. Zyra kept glancing back, as if making sure he wasn't falling behind. She didn't slow down much, but she didn't leave him behind either. When they reached the rocky base, she found a narrow opening between two jagged cliffs. The wind didn't reach here, and inside was a shallow cave. The stone walls were dry, and the air felt warmer already. This will do, she said. Ethan dropped his pack with relief. Better than the shuttle. No constant engine hum. They built a small fire with the emergency heat sticks from his kit. Zyra sat across from him, her eyes reflecting the flames. Why did you not run from me back on the station? She asked suddenly. Ethan shrugged. You didn't seem like you were going to kill me. Her brow rose slightly. You guessed. Wrong. I was deciding. He gave a short laugh. Guess I got lucky. Or... She paused, her gaze lingering on him. Perhaps I was curious. As night fell again, the fire crackled low. The warmth filled the cave, but Ethan still wrapped himself in the blanket. Zira sat beside him, closer than before. Your kind, she began slowly, usually fear mine, and yours usually tear mine apart, Ethan said lightly. She tilted her head. Yet here we are. Guess the galaxy's full of surprises. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, as the firelight flickered across her face, Zira's posture eased. Her shoulders relaxed, and her breathing slowed. She leaned, back slightly, close enough that her hair brushed his arm. Ethan glanced at her, expecting her usual sharp, guarded stare. But her eyes were softer now, watching the flames instead of him. For the first time since meeting her, she didn't look like a predator. The deadliest alien girl alive was sitting beside him in silence as the night grew cold outside. Ethan wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing. This strange truce between them was turning into something else, something he didn't quite understand yet. The cave was quiet except for the faint crackle of the small fire and the soft hiss of wind outside. The snowstorm had passed, but the cold still wrapped around the mountain like an invisible predator. Inside, the fire's glow danced on the stone walls, giving the place a strange feeling of safety. Ethan sat with his back against the wall, the heat blanket draped over both him and Zyra. She sat close enough that her shoulder pressed lightly against his. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Zyra's golden eyes reflected the flicker of the flames. Normally, her gaze was sharp, like a blade ready to cut. Now it was softer, almost thoughtful. She didn't watch the cave entrance. She didn't scan the shadows. She simply stared at the fire as if it was telling her a story only she could. "Here. You're quiet tonight," Ethan said softly. Her eyes shifted toward him. "You talk too much," he chuckled. "That's probably true, but I notice things, and you're different tonight." She tilted her head. "Different?" "Less. Like you're deciding whether or not to claw me in my sleep." For a brief second, the corner of her mouth twitched, so fast Ethan almost missed it. "Perhaps I have already decided," she said. "Should I be worried? You are alive, human. That is answer enough." The fire burned low, and the cold began to creep in again. Ethan pulled the blanket tighter, but the icy air still brushed against his skin. "You're warm," he said. "My body holds heat well," Zyra replied. "It is natural for my kind." He hesitated, then said, "Guess I don't mind sitting closer then." To his surprise, she didn't object. She even shifted slightly so their sides touched more fully. The difference was immediate, like leaning against a living furnace. "Better?" she asked. "Much better," he said with a grin. They stayed, like that for a while, listening to the soft hum of the fire. Ethan found his eyes growing heavy, the day's exhaustion catching up to him. But just as he began to drift off, he felt something strange, a low, steady vibration. At first, he thought it was his imagination, maybe the echo of the fire in the cave walls. But then he realized it was coming from Zyra. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't threatening, it was softer, deeper, almost soothing. "You're purring?" he asked, surprised. Her eyes opened slightly, the gold catching the light. "It is not a thing I do often," she said quietly. "It means my body is calm." Ethan smirked. "So the deadliest alien girl alive feels calm, sitting next to me." She didn't answer at first. Then she said, "Strange, isn't it?" "Very," he admitted, "but I'll take it as a compliment." As the night deepened, Zyra shifted again, this time leaning more of her weight against him. Her head came to rest lightly on his chest. The purring grew a little stronger, the vibration warming him in a way the fire never could. Ethan froze for a second, unsure if moving would break the moment. He decided not to move at all. He just sat there, listening to the rhythm of her breath, feeling the quiet rumble in her chest. "You trust me enough to sleep?" he asked softly. "Trust is not the word," she murmured, her voice almost drowsy. "But right now, you are warm, and you are not my enemy." "I'll take that." Ethan didn't know how long he stayed awake after that. Time felt slower, like the cold and the snow outside couldn't touch them here. Eventually he drifted into a light sleep himself, his head resting slightly against hers. When he woke, it was morning, or what passed for morning on this icy moon. The pale sun shone weakly through the cave entrance, casting long shadows. Zyra was still beside him, her head still on his chest, eyes closed. For a moment, Ethan simply watched her. She looked different when she wasn't glaring or ready to fight. Her sharp features seemed softer. The faint rise and fall of her breathing almost made her seem human. He didn't move until she stirred, her eyes opening slowly. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You did not push me away. I figured that might end badly for me," he said with a grin. Her gaze lingered on him a little longer. "Perhaps I was wrong about humans." "And what did you think before?" "That they are weak." She paused. "Some still are, but you... perhaps not." They ate a small breakfast, ration bars again, which Zira still made a face at, and packed up to leave. The storm had cleared completely, and the air felt lighter. They needed to find a better shelter or, with luck, a rescue signal. As they walked down the snowy slope, Ethan noticed Zira staying closer to him than before. Not so close that anyone would think she was guarding him, but close enough that he felt she was aware of every step he took. They didn't speak much during the walk, but every now and then, when the wind shifted, he could hear that faint purring sound again. It wasn't constant, but it was there, like a secret she didn't mind him knowing anymore. That evening, they found another small cave, this one with a deeper chamber shielded from the wind. After setting up the fire, Ethan stretched out his arms. "This one's even better than last night." Zira gave him a sideways look. "Do not think you have earned my company yet." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh? So no purring tonight?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, but the corner of her mouth twitched again. "We will see, human. We will see." As the firelight flickered across the stone walls, Ethan realized something important. He had started this strange journey thinking of Zira as a threat. But now, sitting in the quiet warmth of the cave, he was starting to think of her as something else. Not exactly a friend, not exactly an ally, but something in between, something rare. And the fact that she had purred against his chest. That was proof enough that even the deadliest alien girl alive could find comfort in a human. The rescue team arrived early the next day. The shuttle had sent out a weak distress signal before its power finally died. Now, a large mining ship hovered above the frozen moon, its mechanical arms lowering a small transport pod toward Ethan and Zira's cave. Ethan watched the pod's landing with relief. The cold had tested him more than he expected, and he was ready to leave the icy world behind. Zira stood quietly beside him, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. Though her expression remained serious, Ethan could still hear that low purring, vibration whenever she relaxed, which was rare. The bond between them had grown stronger, but neither said much about it. As the rescue pod touched down, 2 soldiers stepped out. They were surprised to find not just Ethan, but Zira waiting. Both species had been warned to avoid each other. Humans feared the Xerath's deadly reputation, and the Xerath saw humans as fragile and weak. The soldiers aimed their weapons at Zira immediately. Ethan stepped in front of her, raising his hands. "Wait," he said firmly. "She's with me." One of the soldiers sneered. "That's the deadliest Xerath warrior alive. Why isn't she in chains?" Zira's gaze locked on the soldiers. Her voice was cold but clear. "Because I protect him." The soldiers hesitated. The weight of Zira's words surprised them more than her presence. Ethan looked at Zira in disbelief. "Protect me? Why?" Zira's eyes softened just a little. "Because you showed no fear. Because you did not run. Because you made me curious." Curious. The word echoed in Ethan's mind. The soldiers lowered their weapons, though they still watched her carefully. Back on the mining station, news of the rescue spread quickly. The story of the deadliest Xerath warrior who had escaped captivity and returned with a human engineer caused shockwaves. Rumors grew faster than facts. Some said Zira had been tamed by Ethan. Others whispered that she was guarding him like a loyal pet. The truth was more complicated. Ethan tried to ignore the gossip, focusing instead on helping the engineers repair the station's damaged systems. Zira stayed nearby, quiet but alert. Her presence was both a comfort and a warning to everyone. One afternoon, Ethan was repairing a power relay near the main control room when Zira appeared beside him. "You work well with machines," she said, watching him carefully. "Thanks. I've had practice," Ethan replied, wiping sweat from his brow. Zira nodded. "And you speak boldly. I have heard the stories," he smiled. "Not all true, I hope." She studied him for a moment. "Some are true, but the stories cannot measure what you are." "What do you mean?" "You are different, stronger than many humans, and braver." Ethan felt a flush rise in his cheeks. Compliments from a warrior like Zira were rare. Later that day, Zira accompanied Ethan to the station's mess hall. The room fell quiet when she entered. People whispered behind their hands and stared openly. A few soldiers gave Ethan curious looks, some skeptical, others confused. Zira didn't seem to notice or care. She walked beside Ethan, her movements graceful and confident. When a group of engineers mocked her softly, calling her the alien beast, Zira stopped and turned slowly, her golden eyes fixed on them with a calm, deadly warning. "Speak carefully," she said in a low voice. The engineers quickly fell, silent. Ethan stepped forward, a little embarrassed. "She's not a beast. She's helped save this station." Zira's voice was softer now. "And she will protect it." The room was quiet again, but something had changed. The stories about the Zareth warrior and the human who had tamed her were no longer just rumors. They were becoming truth. One evening, as the station's artificial sun dimmed into night, Ethan and Zira sat alone on the observation deck, looking out into the stars. "I never expected this," Ethan said quietly. "A deadliest warrior from another species, choosing to protect me." Zira looked at him with those golden eyes shining like distant suns. "You surprise me, human. You are not like the others." He smiled. "Maybe I'm just lucky." She leaned closer. "Or maybe you are more than that." For a moment, the vastness of space felt smaller, like it belonged to them alone. As days passed, the partnership between humans and the Zareth on Argus 12 changed. The two species began talking, more, sharing knowledge and working together against common threats. Zira's presence was key. She showed both sides that cooperation was possible and powerful. Ethan often found her watching him with a curious, almost gentle expression. One day, he teased her softly. "Still think my claws are smaller than yours?" She responded with a soft purr. It was a sound that once would have terrified anyone. Now it was a sign that the deadliest alien girl alive had found a place where she could rest, and maybe even trust. The calm on Argus 12 did not last long. A message arrived from the Zareth homeworld. Zira's commanders demanded her return. They needed their deadliest warrior back for a new war brewing at the edge of known space. Zira stood in the hangar bay, beside Ethan. Her armor gleamed under the harsh lights, but her expression was heavy. "I must go," she said simply. Ethan nodded, trying to hide the tightness in his chest. "I understand." She looked at him, her golden eyes serious. "You are more than a human I met. You are my choice." He swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" "It means I will not leave you behind." The words surprised him. For weeks he thought their strange friendship was temporary, a result of the harsh cold and danger. But now, Zira was making it clear she wanted to stay. "We can face whatever comes next," she said, together. The day of her departure was filled with quiet tension. The station's crew watched as Zira prepared to board the transport ship. Some were curious. Others feared what this might mean for future relations with the Zareth. Ethan walked with her to the ship's airlock. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, her lips curled into a small smile. "I am sure about you." Before stepping inside, Zira looked back. "Still think your claws are smaller than mine?" she teased softly. Ethan grinned. "Maybe, but I think mine can hold on tighter." With that, she disappeared into the ship. The doors closed behind her, leaving Ethan standing alone in the hangar. Days turned into weeks. Communications between Zyra and Ethan were rare but steady. She sent short messages, reports of battles, brief thoughts, and sometimes just simple greetings. The war on the Zareth homeworld was fierce. Zyra's skills made her a legend among her people once again, but her thoughts often returned to Ethan. Back on Argus 12, Ethan continued his work. The station was safer now, with better cooperation between humans and Zareth. Zira's presence had changed everything. One night, Ethan sat alone on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. A soft vibration reached him through his communicator, a message from Zira. "When this war ends, I return. Together." He smiled and replied, "I'll be waiting." The future was uncertain. The galaxy was full of dangers, and many battles awaited. But for Ethan and Zira, a new path had begun, one built on trust, respect, and something more. They had started as enemies, then became unlikely allies, and now something stronger was growing. The deadliest alien girl alive had found a human who saw beyond the claws and teeth, and Ethan had found a warrior who could purr. Together, they would face whatever the stars had in store.